Welcome everybody, and we can get started. So I'd like to welcome you all to this London Tech Week Fringe event on sort of the topic of smart mobility. The title of the webinar is Driving Forward Smart Mobility Trends in China and the UK. My name is Chris Udemans, and I'm a reporter at TechNode. I'll be the moderator and the host of the webinar today. Before we start, TechNode wants to announce that we've signed a partnership with a strategic partnership with London and partners, and this webinar is one of the many initiatives that is formed under this partnership. It's aimed at bringing or helping both Chinese and British technology companies achieve their goals of international growth and to help promote each other's communications in the tech industry. You will receive a follow-up email after this webinar where you'll be able to find out more about that. So over the next hour or so, this is the agenda for the next hour or so. We're going to start with just a sort of short overview of the smart mobility industry trends in China, and then we'll move on to an overview of the UK automotive industry from Aminda Tang. And after that, we'll move on to a panel discussion. So we'd like to encourage you to if you have any questions, to go ahead and ask those in the Q&A section. The chat room has been disabled, so please do leave your comments in the or questions in the Q&A section, and we'll address them when we can. And also note that this webinar will be recorded, so and shared with you after the webinar. So yeah, so we're going to start with a sort of a general overview of China's smart mobility industry, which I will be introducing. So looking at the 4 biggest trends in China's smart mobility sector, these are from our reporting at the sort of the trends we've noticed through our reporting at TechNode, myself and one of my colleagues. And so we spend a lot of time looking at young EV makers, especially those that have sort of made moves to go global recently. So one thing that we've noticed is that young EV makers collectively are sort of catching up with Tesla, and that legacy automakers are kind of falling behind. Yeah, so the young EV makers in China, like NIO and XPeng and Li Auto, they've been making and also iWays. We have Dr. Klose on the webinar today, have been making sort of great strides in EV in China. And so far, collectively, these companies have grabbed nearly 30% of the electric vehicle market as of July. Some of these companies have seen some sort of great increases in the number of cars that they've been delivering compared to last year. And a lot of them have started looking at going public in the US. Like NIO went public a couple of years ago, Li Auto recently, and XPeng. And so they're nearing, their market values are sort of nearing the size of a number of legacy automakers like GAC and Great Wall Motors. Next, we have Electromobility, and EV adoption in China's ride-hailing market is growing quite substantially. Didi, China's biggest ride-hailing market, has said that nearly 1/3 of all of its vehicles on its platform are EVs. And if you sort of catch a ride in some of China's biggest cities, you'll notice that a lot of the vehicles in sort of that ride-hailing platforms use are the majority are EVs, or a lot of the ones that you'd catch in the bigger cities. And then also the local governments have been pushing to electrify their taxi fleets. In places like Beijing and Shenzhen especially, you'll see that a lot of these vehicles in these cities have been electrified, and it's quite an amazing thing to see. Obviously, economics is a big driver of this change, because according to Bain and Company, it ends up being a lot cheaper by switching to EVs. And a lot of sales of electric vehicles in China are sort of driven by these large taxi fleets. And then next up is bike rental. So the bike rental industry has changed considerably in the last few years, and the sort of the focus these days has moved from this sort of hyper scaling model of OFO a few years ago, which has now sort of kind of faded into obscurity, and now the sort of the bigger bike sharing or bike rental platforms are Hello Bike, Didi, and Meituan. They also have Meituan sort of bought out Mobike a few years ago, but they've also sort of rebranding those Mobike bikes as Meituan Bike, and you see these bicycles lining the streets. And so now from our reporting, we've seen that these companies are now focusing on profit rather than sort of this model of hyper scaling. And companies like Hello Bike started in China's lower tier cities and have moved up from there. But they have, as other bike sharing companies have expanded, we've noticed that Hello Bike, the sort of the one of the most dominant companies, its market share is starting to fall. Interestingly, Chinese cities are vying for dominance in self-driving cars. So there's a lot of competition between cities trying to roll out sort of testing grounds for self-driving cars, but also sort of making it friendlier for companies to sort of roll out their pilot platforms or pilot programs rather in these cities. VW said it's going to launch a fleet of sedans as part of an autonomous ride-hailing service in Hefei, which is in eastern China. Geely's ride-hailing platform Taobao has partnered with Deeproot, and they're planning to offer a robo-taxi service in Hangzhou next year, also in eastern China. And obviously the big one, Baidu has begun testing a fleet of 500 robo-taxis in Beijing, Changsha, and a number of other cities. And Pony AI and WeRide, they operate in southern China, in Guangzhou. And other companies like Didi and AutoX have rolled out sort of autonomous ride-hailing services in Shanghai. So those are some of the bigger trends that we've seen in China's smart mobility space. So up next, I'd like to invite Aminda Tang, the head of advanced manufacturing and transport at the Department for International Trade of China, to give us an overview of the UK's automotive industry.
Hi everyone, thanks Chris. Hi everyone, this is Aminda Tang. I work with Department for International Trade. For those of you who don't know DIT that well, it's a UK government organization with its HQ in London and overseas offices in 108 markets. We mainly do two things: to help UK companies to trade internationally, in my context to trade in China, and help Chinese companies to invest in the UK. I have been given 5 minutes to give an overview of the auto industry in the UK and the trend of the future mobility. So I'm going to make my introduction in 3 areas. Firstly, the overview of the UK automotive industry. Secondly, the support UK government give to the industry. And thirdly, the R&D priorities for the auto sector in the UK. Next slide, please. Thank you. Manufacturing is crucial to the economy, providing 10% of the UK's gross value added, generating around 50% of our exports and accounting for 70% of business-led R&D. Automotive is undoubtedly one of the most important pillars to manufacturing sector for the UK. UK auto industry has enjoyed continuous growth and renaissance in last 10 years. Before the interruption of pandemic, the production of vehicles has been stable at 1.2 to 1.7 million units. UK auto industry has been diverse and dynamic with volume manufacturers such as JLR, Nissan UK, and the small volume manufacturer such as Aston Martin and McLaren, all based in the UK. UK is the #1 premium vehicle manufacturing country in Europe. Furthermore, motorsport has been a unique selling point for the UK, with 6 out of 10 F1 teams set up their HQ in the UK. As a country with long history of overseas trade, 8 out of 10 cars made in the UK are exported not only to Europe, but over 160 countries around the world. Next slide, please. So in January 2018, the UK government announced the first automotive sector deal, which builds on the long-standing partnership between the government and industry. In future, the automotive sector will shape our response to the grand challenges articulated in UK's industrial strategies, such as clean growth and in the future of mobility, transformations which will forever change how people live, work, and travel. Also in 2018, the UK is issued the Road to Zero strategy, which states that our mission is to put UK at the forefront of the design and manufacturing of zero-emission vehicles, and for all new cars and vans to be effectively zero-emission by 2040. In order to achieve this vision, government supported investment for R&D in low-carbon emission technologies. So if you look at this slide, Advanced Propulsion Center, APC, is a 10-year, £1 billion initiative funded 50-50 by government and industry to support the development of low-carbon technologies, including participants spread across the UK. If you're a foreign company, say a Chinese company, you're entitled to bid for the funding as long as you have R&D presence in the UK. The UK government invests £274 million through the Faraday Battery Challenge into a program of competitions focused on the research, innovation, and the scaling up of battery technology to make the UK a world leader of batteries for the electrification of vehicles. In addition to above, the government announced this July to plus an extra £1 billion automotive transformation fund available to develop key technologies and factories of the future. The Automotive Transformation Fund supports the development of new electrified supply chain capability in the UK, which includes supports to industrialization at scale of electrified vehicle technologies, such as batteries, motor and drivers, power electronics, fuel cells, supply chain and materials, and recycling. It is estimated that the CAV sector will be worth £52 billion to the UK economy by 2035. The UK has an opportunity to establish a global leadership position in the demonstration and deployment of connected and autonomous vehicle technologies, building on our competitive regulatory environment. This must evolve with the times to support the emergence of new technologies and new business models. The government will ensure the UK continues to have one of the most open environments in the world for transport innovation and new services. So government and industry have committed an initial £200 million through Zenzic to develop a coordinated national platform of CAV testing infrastructure. Today we also have Daniel, CEO from Zenzic, to join the panel, so I'll leave Daniel to introduce more later on. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the R&D priorities for the auto industry in the UK. I have mentioned the low carbon propulsion and the connected autonomous vehicle technology. So I will only talk about the lightweighting composites very quickly. UK is the leader in motorsport and aerospace composites, and work is being conducted to bring the cutting edge technology into the mainstream auto industry. I'll give a very quick example. So McLaren Composites Technology Center in Sheffield is a partnership to develop and manufacture carbon fiber chassis for future McLaren models. So there's a lot of cool things are taking place right now in the UK, so watch the space. I will stop here, and thanks for listening.
Great, thank you, Aminda. So next up, we are very lucky to have some excellent speakers for a panel discussion on the topic of mobility in China and the UK. So I'm just going to take a minute to introduce the speakers that we have today, and then we'll get straight into the questions and the panel discussion. So we have Dr. Alexandra Klose, Executive VP of Overseas Operations at iWays. Dr. Klose has around 30 years experience in automotive strategy and marketing. Before he joined iWays in 2018, he's held roles at Volvo Cars China, the Asia Pacific president of the Ford Motor Company, Premier Automotive Group, which included Aston Martin, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Volvo brands. And he's also provided consultancy and support services to a number of automotive retail groups in China. Then up next, we have Joseph Constanty, Director of International for NIO, where he's responsible for the growth of the brand, sales channels, and all global partnerships for new mobility solutions. He's been working in the startup ecosystem in China for the past 15 years and is passionate about transforming urban mobility globally. Then David Wong, Senior Technology and Innovation Manager at the UK Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. David is SMMT's lead on connected and automated vehicles, digital and future mobility innovations, and electric and fuel cell vehicles. He's SMMT's interface with the startup community and leads open innovation initiatives to connect the industry with auto tech and mobility startups from all over the world. Then up next, we have Dr. Daniel Ruiz, who's the CEO of Zenzic, as Aminda mentioned. He joined the company in January 2018 to lead the UK's £100 million connected and autonomous vehicle program. Prior to this, Daniel led a 500-strong team as MD of Dynamic, tackling traffic challenges with technology-based solutions. He's also had roles at Transport for London and a launch director for the UK's Intelligent Mobility Innovation Centre. And last but not least, we have Aminda, who's already shared her insights on the UK's automotive industry. So so we can get started with the panel discussion. And I think we're going to be breaking this up into a few sections. So the first section we're starting with is China's success in EVs. Please do remember that if you have any questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists, you can feel free to use the Q&A section, and we'll select those that are related to what we are wanting to speak about. So first up, I think I want to direct this question at Dr. Klose, who's working at a Chinese EV maker, although in global operations. But I just want to sort of get a sense, Dr. Klose, what do you think the biggest driving factors have been for China's success in EV adoption?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question because there were a lot of factors that have helped China develop EVs. I think number one is the regulatory environment. And that doesn't just mean that there were subsidies for EVs or there were subsidies for research into EVs. It's just the whole environment in China that helps promote EVs. Right now, I'm sitting in Munich, inside Germany, in the country that's very well known for not having any speed limits and for having people travel over long distances in internal combustion engine cars. So this is I would say a regulatory environment and a habit that really promotes the use of internal combustion engine vehicles. Whereas in China, you already started with having an environment where you have speed limits, where people would not travel from city to city with cars, or from Shanghai to Beijing, nobody would travel in a car. But you have already from an early start, you have a different infrastructure. On top of that, the Chinese government fairly early on saw the opportunity in this area and just supported the development of this area with various, be it subsidies, be it requirements for manufacturers to go in a certain direction, and had just helped to this area to develop. We have heard before that Didi uses a lot of EVs. This is another example really where in China you have an environment where the government might have helped, but actually the environment really was the one that that pushed forward in this direction. I myself, I'm usually living in Shanghai. I myself use Didis quite often, and they almost every time they EVs, because in an inner city environment like in Shanghai, EV for a taxi driver or for a Didi driver is just the best choice. And they have seen that quite early on. Now, if you look at Europe, you just didn't have the cars available to pick up on those items. And that's why here in Europe, this hasn't really developed. So I think it's a combination of government policies, early regulatory choices, much earlier on than the EV choices, and also then just the geography and let's say the way that China is set up in comparison to Europe.
And David, have you sort of seen any sort of in the UK or any European governments sort of looking to China and seeing sort of what they've done and sort of picking up on these things in order to drive adoption, or sort of have they sort of been paving their own way?
Well, yes, absolutely. Particularly in terms of developing the market, I think both the UK and European governments have been looking at what China has been doing and its secret success. And two things stand out. So one is infrastructure. So if you look at where we are today in the UK, we think it's most important to actually look at the cars to charger ratio. I'm going to talk about public chargers, cars to public charger ratio, rather than public chargers per 100,000 population. That's pointless because not everyone in the population at the moment owns an EV. So if you look at cars to charger ratio, the UK has about 12 cars per every slow to fast charger. And that means anything up to 22 kilowatts public chargers. China has 11 to 1, so it's almost the same. But difference is where rapid and ultra rapid chargers are concerned. China's ratio of the number of cars to every single rapid or ultra rapid charger is about 16 to 1. In the UK, it's 56 to 1. So 56 cars actually currently share a rapid or ultra rapid charger, whereas it's about 16 to 1 in China. So that's something that we can learn from, something that I think the UK and European governments are beefing up, significantly uplifting the number of public chargers to give people the confidence. And it is, yes, about perception, but perception is reality for a lot of people that we are trying very hard to convince to switch to EVs in UK and Europe. So that's one. And the second one is really about incentives. And really to drive an early market, the importance of incentives to overcome the affordability barrier is key. And what we've seen in terms of data from our counterparts in China, the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, show that when incentives were rolled back by the Chinese government sometime last year, you could see the second half of 2019, the sales of EVs, or new energy vehicles as you call them, in China had plunged. And similarly, the same trend could be seen in some major markets in Europe, even back in 2017, I believe it was Hong Kong that experienced the same trend. So it's quite important for governments in Europe actually to put money where the ambition is. And to drive uptake, it's important to incentivize people to switch to EVs, considering that at the moment, like for like, EVs are still a tad more expensive than the internal combustion engine counterparts.
And Joseph, I mean, you work for a sort of an e-mobility company it's a Chinese company, but has expanded considerably abroad. Could you kind of talk a little bit about sort of e-mobility adoption in China and sort of the things that you've noticed there?
Sure. At New, slightly different than Neo. At New, we're focused on two wheels, and in China, for the better part of the past decade, electric mopeds or e-bikes, however you want to classify them, have been a significant portion of moving people around Chinese cities. Something on the order of about 26 million units are sold every single year in China alone. So when it comes to micromobility, a bike or a scooter in China, it plays a significant factor in helping people, urban dwellers, move around their cities. And as we look at how that will be taken to outside, in Europe or Southeast Asia or the Americas, each market will have its own needs that are going to be different than China. But what we found in China is that over a decade ago, it started with lead acid battery, and then with us about 4 or 5 years ago, we transformed the market into lithium-ion battery-powered electric scooters, is that the adoption of electric two wheels in Chinese cities has always been quite high. That has to do with affordability, but also more importantly with congestion that exists inside Chinese cities, which has been a huge factor in driving the growth of our space of two wheels. And very early on, many years ago, it was government mandates that were put in place in the early 2000s that took people away from petrol mopeds and motorcycles to LPG powered, and then over to electric before 2010. And then since then, it's just naturally grown from there.
And another question for you, Joseph, as a sort of a Chinese company, what do you see sort of the advantages of sort of being a Chinese company and moving into the global EV market? What sort of advantages do you see New as having?
I think the scale that we're able to develop on and have our home base in China is a great advantage that allows us to put our R&D resources primarily initially at a Chinese market, and then adapting those and applying them to overseas markets. So that's a nice advantage. Not to mention the fact that most of the supply chain for the EV space is in China, and that provides an additional benefit, not just from the hardware, but also the software and the people software as well, and that whole value chain that you have to understand is quite substantial and strong in China. And we see that as an advantage, but then everything that we do as we go abroad, we are looking at everywhere we go, every market we go into, we are always partnering with local companies with distribution, with sales, and even with development of some of the technology as well.
We have a question that's come in from somebody in the audience who wants to know, can the EV supply chain be replicated in Europe instead of China?
I think we should let Daniel or Dr. Klose touch on that one.
I'll have a quick stab at starting on that one if Alex is okay. This is not exactly my field, but the sister company to Zenzic, the Advanced Propulsion Center, is very active in this space. And as Aminda has explained, there's been substantial investment over the last 5 years and more in developing the supply chain for electric vehicles and battery manufacture in particular in the UK. So there's absolutely no reason why there shouldn't be an establishment of a supply chain in the UK and Europe. And in many respects, of course, there needs to be, because there is the usual argument that the weight of the battery means that you need to manufacture the vehicle near the battery manufacturer site rather than transporting the batteries themselves.
Yeah, I think this is what you said last is really the crucial point here. Where do you want to build not your battery, but where do you want to build your cells? And this is sort of the biggest task, I would say, to have cell manufacturing in Europe. I mean, from our perspective, we could well foresee that over time we'll move to having at least a KD manufacturing in Europe. I mean, even if we're now very small, but we kind of, as we think about growing up, we would probably see that we have the battery manufacturing, so the battery configurations. So we need a cell manufacturer in Europe. We have battery manufacturing in Europe, and then we would assemble the car with a battery. Because, like you just said, the one thing that in all this sending items back and forth that doesn't make sense is that we lack these very heavy batteries back and forth. And we already see investment in this area, be it from CATL, who are setting up in Eastern Germany, but also be it from other companies who are thinking about building cell manufacturing sites in Europe. And definitely that can be replicated in Europe. You have manufacturing of drive motors in Europe already. So it's all there. It just needs to be put together. And sort of just listening to some of the items that have been discussed, I think the one thing where China had an advantage is that actually some of the manufacturers really went for going all out in electric. I mean, for us, we are a purely electric company, so our whole platform, the whole supply chain, everything is done in a way of focusing on electric, which gives us certain advantages, which helps us actually to come to a position, David, you said before that electric cars are still more expensive. I would actually contest that. We're now in a position where electric cars, like for like, are roughly the same as internal combustion engines. If you get subsidies on top, you're definitely cheaper. So we now at a break point, and we have achieved that because we could focus on electric only. I think that's, if you think about setting things up in Europe, that's what needs to be happening. And I think some of the manufacturers are going in that direction already.
Can I just quickly build on what Daniel and Alex have said regarding building an EV supply chain in Europe, and also perhaps given where we come from, a focus on the UK. When we talk about EV supply chain, and of course it's very easy for us just to be very fixated about batteries, but actually there are three parts of the EV supply chain, and they're all very critical. So obviously battery and cell manufacturing is one. The second one is battery materials supply chain, so the chemicals industry. And the two are closely related, and there are lots of synergies to have them located within proximity of each other. And the third one is actually the wider supply chain on the components, particularly power electronics, motors, and electric drivetrains. So the three of these, if you put them together in regional locations, they could be very powerful in spawning escalated EV manufacturing, particularly if we're talking about Europe, because it's not a very huge continent. And that's what, as Daniel alluded to just now, through the work of the Advanced Propulsion Center and other stakeholders in the UK, we're working hard to ensure that going forward, there are investors in the UK who are interested to invest in battery cell manufacturing, as well as others who are also keen to set up shop in the UK for battery materials, as well as power electronics, motors and drives. So if you think about Europe as a whole, right? Based on the latest figures, about 450 gigawatt hour per annum capacity of lithium ion battery for automotive is earmarked till 2030, right? And in 10 years from 2030, we expect about 1.2 terawatt hours. So that's huge, right? There are lots of commitment there. And a lot of them are actually also from players, battery players from the Far East, China included, CATL, as mentioned just now. Of course, what we need to do in the UK is to mount a strong and concerted effort to actually have a slice, if you like, of that capacity in the UK to ensure that the UK is the location of choice for EV manufacturing going forward. And just very quickly on Alex's point regarding the potential parity in the price between a battery electric vehicle and internal combustion engine. So the best way to look at this is the poster boy in Europe, the poster market, if you like, and that's Norway. Everybody looks at Norway. But what people may not necessarily know about Norway is that most people who are EV drivers in Norway actually bought a battery electric vehicle, not so much because of their environmental concerns. Of course, they're minded about the environment, but that's not their main concern. That's not their main motivation, according to the Norwegian EV Association. This came from the horse's mouth. Right? But 75% of them bought an EV because of economic considerations. And why? Because the Norwegian government put money where the ambition is. What they did was that they eliminated sales tax and VAT from battery electric vehicles in Norway. And that brought a like-for-like battery electric vehicle to price parity with an internal combustion engine, if not cheaper. So that's what the Norwegians have done. So I suppose the other side of the coin of that is obviously if the Norwegian government did not do that, I suppose that even in markets such as Norway, price parity wouldn't have been achieved.
Okay, let me pick this up. This is a direct challenge, so I'd love to pick it up. We're not yet in the Norwegian market, therefore you can't see that right now. But what I'm referring to is that a lot of cars in the past have been built in a way that EVs almost naturally became more expensive than their ICE counterparts. And you're absolutely right, there are numerous examples where it's up to 100% more expensive than the ICE counterpart, the direct ICE counterpart. That's, I think, where the industry is shifting right now and has to shift. And I think, part of the proof of that shift, that you can actually build a vehicle like for like that is on par with the equivalent ICE car, having the same kind of performance as the ICE car. The one thing that an EV cannot do for a longer period of time is going down a motorway at 200 kilometers per hour. That's the one area where the EV is not good for, but it can do other things much better than an ICE vehicle, for example, acceleration, if you wish to have that. So that's what I was referring to. The industry needs to go in that direction, and I think ourselves plus some of the competitors, startups in China are proof of that. They haven't come to Europe yet, but we're showing that also to be the case in Europe. You're absolutely right that we also think that the governments need to put sort of either the money or regulation where they wish the whole development to go, and that might be building infrastructure. I think that's actually the foremost most important area where they need to support building infrastructure, because it's the key deterrent. Even people who would like to have an EV, if they're sitting in the wrong area, and it could just be in the wrong city where there's very few charges, they won't buy it. I mean, even if they would pay more than for an ICE car, for some of the cars from our competitors, they will not buy it if they can't charge the vehicle. So this is really something where also a lot of things have happened in Norway. Norway, on top of what you have said, have a fantastic infrastructure, an infrastructure which also allows EVs to go in areas where no ICE can go anymore, which is very clear, because an EV is driving at zero emissions in noise and CO2 or any noxious emissions. So obviously you can let it go to areas where an ICE shouldn't go anymore.
Cool, thanks. I want to sort of focus back in on the UK. And Daniel, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about the sort of regulatory status of electric vehicles in the UK and where it's going. I mean, we've heard a little bit about sort of China, but could you sort of give us an idea of what the situation is like in the UK?
Okay, so I can try. I will look to David to give me some facts and figures, because he's got those at his fingertips. And reminder that my focus area is on connectivity and automated driving. But actually, in 2018, the UK government passed an act of Parliament called the Automated and Electric Vehicle Act, which was a fairly seminal piece of work. And addressed a number of the issues that are required to lay foundations. I think that Alex referred to the fact that the regulatory environment in China was laid down very early, and the leadership shown by government. There is a mirror in the UK, and it's not just down to the regulations, the legislation, but down to the codes of practice, the kind of the standards that are shaped, whether they are formal or informal. So informal is just kind of talking about how we should do something. There's a spectrum of formality which goes through. We have a mechanism within the British Standards Institute called the publicly accepted standard, which is a local standard that can be turned around very fast, which means it works in parallel with innovation, but then eventually can feed into formal standards, BSI or ISO, whatever they be. And that kind of process is quite well established. In the AV world, we have had a process over the last couple of years of developing a number of standards around safety and safety testing and so on. And this will be mirrored in the electric world, I have no doubt. So there's the standards, there are codes of practice out there which people are following, and they've formed a benchmark for worldwide testing and development. And then there's the regulation, but of course that needs to keep moving as well. And the UK currently has a Law Commission review looking into automated vehicle testing and deployment. Similar processes going on around EVs, I have no doubt. I'll pass on to David there to give some more facts that are specific to your question on EVs.
Thanks, Daniel. On the EV side, I think it's important to differentiate between regulation, i.e. legislation, and policy, because policy may not necessarily always lead to regulation in the first instance. But if you're talking about regulation, the mother of all regulations, if you like, in the UK, is something that was passed last year, written into law. The UK will end its contribution to emissions, to pollution worldwide, by way of our aspiration to achieve net zero by 2050. So if you like, that's the overarching one. And in terms of policy, the government currently is considering its proposal to end the sale of non-zero emission vehicles by 2035, if not sooner. So a decision by ministers will probably be due in a few months' time. But there are other pieces of regulation or regulations in progress that are actually quite interesting, that will actually, in my opinion, give a shot in the arm to the uptake of EVs in this country, which is actually wonderful. So one of them, for example, mentioned by Daniel, the Automated Electric Vehicles Act 2018 requires all charge points to be smart, and smart charge points to share data with a central repository in real time. That is actually very helpful, and government is currently looking at developing secondary legislation to outline what smart charging looks like and the technical requirements for smart chargers. So by smart charging, we do mean managed charging, and it's to shave the peak when there is a constraint in the local network to enable electric vehicles to be charged smartly, and also to delay the need to expensively reinforce the local networks. There's another piece of regulation that is that's being consulted on that hopefully will be passed at some point, and that relates to building regulations. The government is looking at mandating all new homes and buildings undergoing major renovations to be equipped with a charge point. So that would help drive market uptake. So we think some of these regulations that are either being passed or currently being considered will be very helpful to drive market uptake. Perhaps the one that is not there yet, but we think is actually quite important, is actually to regulate the consumer experience, or to regulate the provision of infrastructure that affects consumer experience. So at the moment in Europe, there's something called the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation 2017. What it means, to cut the long story short, is that by the 18th of November 2018, all public charge points in Europe, including the UK, will need to provide ad hoc access to the user, meaning anyone can rock up to a charge point and use it without needing to hold multiple RFID membership cards, and one particularly with that charge point operator. However, it has not been properly enforced. So what we need actually is regulation that is being enforced to ensure that people can rock up to a charge point and pay via a contactless credit card, for example, or perhaps through network roaming. So that is an important piece of regulation that we think government should enforce.
Great, thanks to you, both of you. Joseph, I want to jump back to you now. You spoke a little bit about sort of what you've seen in China, but in how is that differed in the UK and markets that you're in Europe? Are there any sort of differences in sort of the way that your products and sort of e-mobility products that you've noticed are being adopted? Are there any sort of things that are sort of specific to the UK market or the European market that you've noticed?
Sure. I think obviously the European market for electric two wheels is much smaller than China. When we entered here, when we first set up our distribution in Europe, including the UK in 2016, early 2017, there were less than 20,000 electric two-wheelers being sold every single year. And most of them were for B2B purposes, cargo delivery, postal delivery, things like that. In the intervening time, we have begun to see a transition where typical petrol buyers of mopeds, of a Vespa or a Kymco type of product, have begun to transition to electric. And more so in countries like the Netherlands, has been much faster. Countries like Germany, very fast to take up this transition because they have been more aligned to electric mobility for many, many years. The UK specifically, where we launched in late 2018, we've begun to see considerable growth in the market as compared to, say, the petrol two-wheel small displacement 50cc, 125cc space. Are there big differences in adoption? I mean, it's just mass adoption in China. It's one of the main modes of transportation. Where in Europe, mopeds and scooters like this are still secondary, and especially with the growing segment of electric bikes and electric kick scooters, these are competing directly against the moped space, and something that we're watching very, very closely. But beyond that, the one insight that I think everyone really needs to understand from urban mobility is that each particular market, even down to the city-urban level, has a particular need. And that because of that different need, there is a different type of product that solves that need. So there's not a one-size-fits-all mobile phone for a market. It's a multiple type of product, whether that's an electric bike, an electric moped, an electric kick scooter, and sometimes electric shared four-wheel EV as well. So beyond that, I can't add too much.
Aminda, I'd like to bring you in a little bit to talk about sort of in what ways have you noticed that the UK government, or what do you think the UK government is doing better than China to kind of adopt these sort of e-mobility solutions?
I think UK and China are very different countries in many aspects. So I think it's not actually about who's doing better, but rather, the country is adopting solutions that respond to the challenge, and which is suitable for the country, for the market. I've introduced the supportive policy UK government adopted to enhance new energy vehicle and connected autonomous vehicle in the UK just now. I think there are some areas that UK government is doing particularly well. Firstly, the approach to build an ecosystem where government, academia, industry, R&D institution could work together integrally to come up with the next generation technology, the solution to tackle the challenges. Secondly, the support to R&D is open and transparent. So for overseas companies, as long as you have a UK R&D presence, you are entitled to apply for the fund, which is very attractive to auto players around the world. Of course, there are a lot of other conditions you need to meet, the requirements you need to meet. It's not just that simple, but I think this is very attractive to Chinese companies. So for example, Geely, they through APC, Advanced Propulsion Center, they form. Actually, it's the company subsidiary in the UK of Geely Group, LEVC, the London Electric Vehicle Company, formed a consortium with local university and other companies and won a bid, which is about decarbonizing light commercial vehicles through zero emission innovation. So total project value is 44 million pounds, with 17.5 million pounds funded through the APC. So this is, I think this is really good thing that could happen to overseas auto companies. Thirdly, the government gives a clear vision, which is long-term in scope and ambition. So for example, the issue of the Road to Zero strategy, and by 2040, all the vehicles, the cars and vans are zero emission. To be sold on the market will be all the new cars are zero emission by 2040. So this gives a very clear signal to the companies, to the business players in the market, so they can come up with their the company strategy, their own roadmap for the future. And lastly, I think the government also review the policy from time to time to make sure the current policy is still relevant to the development of the sector. So for example, again, the Road to Zero strategy, a review of the uptake of ultra-low emission vehicles will take place in 2025 to consider whether interventions are required if not enough progress is being made. I think this is also quite a good thing for the government to regularly to monitor whether the policy they are going to adopt is relevant to the development of the industry.
I think there's a really interesting point there that Aminda's made about the development and the vision that sits around policy. David made the point about policy and regulation being separate things. Absolutely right. Policy is the vision that the government puts out. And where the UK is currently going is around recognizing that zero emissions, electrification and other reduced climate impact powered modes is one thing. Then connectivity, autonomy and mobility, or CAM, not just connected automated vehicles, is another thing. But those things are interdependent. And one of the big initiatives that we're shaping at the moment with government in the UK is called Zero Emissions Automated Logistics, recognizing that that where you have people, passengers involved, it becomes more complicated. City centres complicated. Why we need to solve the problems and get the ball rolling much faster in deployment of self-driving, and where that can reduce the carbon footprint, where it can increase the productivity, where it can increase safety, then combining the benefits of zero emissions and automated vehicles in the logistics realm, it has a lot of potential. So this is somewhere where the UK is now focusing, and we're using the Zenzic led Connected and Automated Mobility Testbed UK, the testing facilities, to develop and deploy and prove the and safely deploy these systems. And I know that time is short, but I just wanted to get in that one of the things that we've been looking at recently is a comparison of testing capability in the UK and China, amongst other countries. China clearly has a phenomenal capability. I think that there are something like 43 open, accessible testing sites in China, with a range of capabilities from controlled environments through mixed, public, controlled, and fully public environments. The UK, of course, is smaller, but what we're doing with Zenzic, with that 200 million that has been mentioned a couple of times of investment over the last few years, we're making sure that what we do have is highly interoperable. So each facility, and there are half a dozen run by 28 companies, a number of consortia all collaborating very effectively, making sure that they are interoperable, making sure that safety cases are applicable equally to all of them and are produced in the same way, so that they are more accessible to users from abroad. And I'd like to leave with an invitation to any users in China, as well as elsewhere in Europe, to come and look at what we have in the UK for their R&D, for their testing and development of electric and automated vehicles.
Thanks, Daniel. We are, we're running short on time now, so I would just like to say thank you to all of the panelists today for your insights. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and thank you to all of the attendees who are watching online today. You will get a recording of this event that will be sent to you after the time. So yeah, on behalf of TechNode, we'd like to thank all of you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.